Hey, honey, what if I kissed my work husband tomorrow? You know, just for fun? Reina's voice drifted from the kitchen where she was loading our dishwasher, casual as asking about the weather. I looked up from my laptop, fingers frozen over the keyboard where I'd been reviewing blueprints for a custom cabinet order. The workshop invoices could wait. Sure, I said, keeping my voice level. Go ahead. She laughed that tinkly laugh she'd perfected in college, the one that used to charm me and now made my teeth ache. Really? You wouldn't mind? I closed the laptop and studied her face. Rowan Kerrick, my wife of 7 years, stood there in her corporate blazer and pencil skirt, looking like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. Her auburn hair was pulled back in that severe bun she'd adopted since her promotion to HR director at Pinnacle Industries. Everything about her screamed professional competence, but I'd learned to read the tells, the way she avoided my eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she arranged the plates. Why would I mind? I asked. It's just a joke, right? Of course it's just a joke, Rowan. God, you're so serious sometimes. She dried her hands on the dish towel, movements sharp and efficient. Bryce and I were just talking about those silly office traditions. You know how corporate culture can be. Bryce. There it was. Bryce Leston, the golden boy from the marketing department who'd been creeping into our conversations for months. Always, Bryce said this, or Bryce thinks that, or you should meet Bryce sometime. He's hilarious. Right, I said. Hilarious Bryce. Reina shot me a look. Don't be like that. He's a good friend. We work together every day. I nodded and opened my laptop again, pretending to focus on the screen. Then you should definitely kiss him. Sounds like a blast. She stood there for another moment, probably expecting me to say more, to react, to give her the fight she was clearly angling for. When I didn't look up, she huffed and headed upstairs. I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood, then the bedroom door closing with just a little too much force. That's when I knew for certain what I'd suspected for weeks. My wife was having an affair, and she'd just asked my permission to make it public. I sat there in our living room, surrounded by the furniture I'd built with my own hands, listening to the shower running upstairs. 7 years of marriage, and it had come to this. Reina testing the waters, seeing how much she could get away with, probably planning to claim it was all innocent fun if anyone questioned her. The smart thing would have been to confront her right then, demand answers, threaten counseling, make some desperate attempt to save what we'd built together. But I've never been accused of being particularly smart, just thorough, and if Reina wanted to play games, I was going to make sure I understood all the rules first. I opened a new browser window and started typing. Divorce lawyers in Portland, Maine, property division laws, asset protection. I had some research to do. By the time Reina came back downstairs in her silk pajamas, I was reading about no-fault divorce proceedings and taking notes. She curled up on the couch next to me, smelling like that expensive shampoo she'd started buying recently. "What are you working on?" she asked, peering at my screen. "Just some legal stuff for the business," I lied smoothly. Boring contractor nonsense. She lost interest immediately, which told me everything I needed to know about how much she cared about my work these days. Instead, she pulled out her phone and started scrolling through Instagram, occasionally showing me posts from her office friends. I noticed she lingered on the photos that included Bryce. "Oh, look at this one from the company retreat," she said, holding up a picture of herself and several coworkers at some resort bar. "Doesn't Bryce look good in that suit?" I glanced at the photo. Bryce Leston was exactly what I'd expected. Tall, conventionally handsome, with the kind of artificially white smile that screamed expensive dental work. He had his arm around Reina's shoulders, and they were both laughing at something off camera. "He looks like a Ken doll," I said. Reina's smile faltered. "That's not very nice." "You asked what I thought." She put the phone away and we sat in silence for a while, the tension thick enough to cut with a saw. Finally, she yawned dramatically and announced she was going to bed early. "Big day tomorrow," she said. "Important meetings." I stayed downstairs until well past midnight, researching divorce law and making lists. By the time I finally went upstairs, Reina was asleep, curled up on her side of the bed with her back to me. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe, and planned my next move. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. At 5 in the morning, I got up and drove to my workshop. I keep a small office space there, separate from the main workspace where I build custom furniture and cabinets. It's where I handle the business side of things, and more importantly, it's where I keep my real computer setup. I'd been suspicious enough over the past few weeks to install some basic monitoring software on our shared devices. Nothing illegal or invasive, just the kind of parental controls that any married couple might use. Find my phone tracking, shared calendar access, that sort of thing, all with Reina's knowledge and consent, set up months ago when she'd lost her phone at a restaurant. Now I pulled up the location history and started mapping out patterns. Sure enough, there were regular stops at an address I didn't recognize. A quick property search told me it was Bryce Leston's condo complex. The visits always happened during lunch hours or right after work, and they'd been increasing in frequency over the past month. I printed out the reports and added them to a folder I'd started keeping. Then I called my lawyer. Thomas Ingram had handled the legal work when I'd started my contracting business 5 years ago. He was a thin, precise man with wire-rimmed glasses and a dry sense of humor that appealed to me. More importantly, he was discreet and thorough. "Rowan," he said when his secretary put me through, "what can I do for you this early in the morning?" "I need to discuss divorce proceedings," I said without preamble. "Hypothetically." There was a pause. "I see. And these hypothetical proceedings, would they involve asset protection?" "They would involve a lot of things. Can you see me today?" "I can see you in an hour." I spent that hour organizing my thoughts and my evidence. By the time I sat across from Tom's desk, I had a clear picture of what I wanted to accomplish. This wasn't going to be a messy, emotional divorce. It was going to be surgical. "Maine is a no-fault state," Tom explained, reviewing the documents I'd brought. "But that doesn't mean fault can't influence the settlement, especially when it comes to asset division." "What about the house?" "Joint property, but you'll want to document your contributions to improvements and maintenance. I see here you've done extensive renovation work yourself." I nodded. "I built most of the custom features, kitchen cabinets, built-in shelving, finished the basement, probably added $40,000 in value. Document everything. Photos, receipts, time logs if you have them." Tom made notes on his legal pad. "What about her income?" "She makes more than I do. Base salary plus bonuses. I'm self-employed, so my income fluctuates." "That could work in your favor for spousal support calculations." He looked up at me over his glasses. "Rowan, I have to ask, are you certain about this course of action? Marriage counseling might be worth considering." I thought about Reina asking permission to kiss her lover, about the months of lies and deception, about the way she'd looked at Bryce's photo with that dreamy expression she used to reserve for me. "I'm certain," I said. Tom nodded. "Then let's discuss strategy." We spent the next 2 hours going over every detail. Asset inventory, documentation requirements, filing procedures. Tom explained the timeline, the likely outcomes, the various ways this could play out depending on how Reina chose to respond. "The key," he said, "is controlling the narrative from the beginning. File first, be prepared, don't let emotion drive your decisions." I left his office with a thick packet of forms and a clear understanding of what came next. The paperwork would be ready by end of business today. I could file first thing tomorrow morning if I wanted to move fast, and I definitely wanted to move fast. I spent the rest of the day at my workshop trying to focus on a dining table commission while my mind raced through possibilities. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Reina. "Having lunch with the team. Might be late tonight, big project deadline coming up. I checked the location tracker. She was at Bryce's condo. That evening, she came home with takeout from an expensive restaurant, the kind of place she usually complained was too pricey for a casual dinner. She was in an unusually good mood, chattering about work projects and office gossip while we ate. "Oh, and the funniest thing happened today," she said, stabbing at her salad. "Bryce brought up that joke I mentioned to you. About the kissing thing? He thought it was hilarious." I bet he did. She didn't seem to notice the edge in my voice. "We were thinking maybe we should do it at the office party next week. You know, just to see people's reactions. It would be so random and funny." I put down my fork and looked at her. Really looked at her. When had she become this person? When had she started lying so casually, so confidently? When had she decided that our marriage was something she could gamble with for the sake of a cheap thrill? "You should definitely do that," I said. "In fact, I think you should do whatever makes you happy, Reina. Life's too short to worry about other people's feelings." Something in my tone must have finally penetrated because she stopped eating and studied my face. "Are you okay? You've been acting weird lately." "I'm fine. Just thinking about the future." "What about the future?" I smiled at her, the same smile I'd been giving her for 7 years, and watched her relax. "Just wondering what comes next, you know. Change is in the air." She laughed and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "You're so dramatic sometimes. Nothing's going to change. We're solid, Rowan. We're good." "Yeah," I said, squeezing back. "We're good." That night, after she'd gone to sleep, I sat in my workshop office and filled out the divorce papers. Every form, every line, every signature. Tomorrow morning, I would file them with the court. Tomorrow afternoon, I would have them served at her office. But first, I had one more preparation to make. I drove to Pinnacle Industries and used the spare key card Reina had given me months ago for emergencies. The building was empty, except for security, and I knew their patrol schedule from the times I'd picked Reina up from late meetings. Her office was on the 3rd floor, a corner space with windows overlooking the parking lot. I didn't touch anything on her desk or computer. Instead, I went to the supply closet where she kept her spare badge and disabled the magnetic strip with a strong magnet I'd brought from my workshop. Then I pocketed the badge and left everything else exactly as I'd found it. When Reina tried to get into the building tomorrow morning, she'd be locked out. She'd have to go to security, explain the situation, get a temporary badge. It would be embarrassing and inconvenient, a small crack in her professional facade. And when she got to her office, there would be an envelope waiting on her desk. Divorce papers and her disabled badge, with a note that read simply, "The joke's over. R." I drove home through the empty streets, past the 24-hour diner where Reina and I used to go for late-night coffee when we were dating, past the park where we'd had our first real fight about money and made up an hour later. 7 years of shared history, and it was all about to become evidence in a legal proceeding. But as I pulled into our driveway and saw the house I'd renovated with my own hands, the garden Reina had planted and then abandoned, the life we'd built that she was so casually throwing away, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Tomorrow, the games would begin in earnest. But tonight, for the first time in months, I knew exactly where I stood. The next morning, I was up before dawn, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and the newspaper, when Reina stumbled downstairs in her bathrobe. She moved through her usual routine: shower, makeup, power suit, while I pretended to read about local politics and tried not to smile. "Running late," she called from the hallway, the click of her heels sharp on the hardwood. "Big presentation today. Wish me luck." "Good luck," I called back and heard the front door slam. I gave her 20 minutes, then checked the location tracker on my phone. Sure enough, she was sitting in the Pinnacle Industries parking lot, probably on the phone with security, explaining why her badge wasn't working. Probably frustrated and embarrassed, wondering what could have gone wrong. My phone rang at exactly 8:15. "Rowan?" Reina's voice was tight with stress. "The weirdest thing happened. My badge isn't working and I had to get a temporary one from security. Have you ever heard of magnetic strips just failing like that?" "Technology," I said sympathetically. "You know how it is. Probably just worn out." "I guess. Anyway, I'll get a replacement today. Oh, and there's some kind of envelope on my desk. Probably just vendor stuff." "Probably. I should go. This presentation is important, and I'm already behind schedule." "Have a great day, honey." I hung up and started counting. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. I made it to 47 before my phone exploded with calls. I let it ring. Instead, I drove to my workshop and spent the morning sanding a cherry wood coffee table while my phone buzzed incessantly on the workbench. Reina called 16 times in the first hour. Then the calls stopped, and the texts started. "We need to talk. This is insane. You can't be serious. Call me back right now." I finished the sanding, swept up the dust, and organized my tools. Then I drove to Sean Murphy's garage across town. Sean had been my best friend since high school, back when we were both scrawny kids who spent more time in detention than in class. He'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Marines before coming home to open an auto repair shop. These days he was built like a linebacker and had the kind of steady, unflappable demeanor that came from seeing real trouble. "You look like a man with a story," he said when I walked into his office. "And judging by the way your phone keeps buzzing, it's a good one." I told him everything. The affair, the investigation, the divorce papers, the whole elaborate setup I'd orchestrated. Sean listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or raising an eyebrow. "So she asked your permission to kiss her boyfriend," he said when I finished. "In front of you, in your own house." "Yep." "And you said yes." "I did." Sean was quiet for a long moment, thinking it over. Then he started laughing, a deep belly laugh that shook his whole body. "Jesus, Rowan, that's either the smartest thing you've ever done or the dumbest. I can't decide which. Time will tell. What do you need from me?" That was Sean. No judgment, no questions about whether I was making the right choice. Just immediate practical support. It's why we'd stayed friends for 20 years. "Information," I said. "I need to know everything about Bryce Leston, where he lives, where he hangs out, who he talks to. I need to understand what I'm dealing with. Give me his full name and where he works. I'll make some calls." While Sean worked his network of contacts, mechanics, bartenders, gym buddies, the kind of people who knew everything about everyone in a city this size, I drove to the courthouse and checked on my filing. The papers had been processed, and a process server would deliver them to Reina's office before 5 o'clock. Then I went to see Mrs. Eleanor Daly. Mrs. Daly lived next door to us in a Victorian house that had been in her family for 3 generations. She was 78 years old, sharp as a tack, and knew every piece of gossip in a 6-block radius. More importantly, she genuinely liked me and had never warmed up to Reina. "I wondered when you'd figure it out," she said, pouring tea in her cluttered kitchen. "That girl's been sneaking around for months. Different cars in the driveway when you're at work, staying out late, coming home with that guilty look." "You saw other cars?" "Silver BMW usually. Fancy thing with those expensive rims. And once I saw her getting out of it at the end of the block, walking home like she didn't want anyone to notice." I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo I'd found of Bryce's car on his social media. "This BMW? That's the one. Handsome boy driving it too. Not as handsome as he thinks he is, but handsome enough to turn a girl's head if she's inclined toward that sort of foolishness." Mrs. Daly had been married for 53 years before her husband passed away. She had strong opinions about marriage, fidelity, and what she called proper behavior. "What are you planning to do about it?" she asked. "I'm getting divorced." "Good. She doesn't deserve you, Rowan. Never did. Too ambitious, too selfish." I told my Harold when you first brought her around, that girl's going to break his heart someday. Would you be willing to testify about what you've seen, if it comes to that? Absolutely. I've got dates written down in my diary. Habit from the old days when Harold was traveling for work. I always kept track of who came and went in the neighborhood. I spent another hour with Mrs. Daly, getting details and timelines. By the time I left, I had a comprehensive record of Reina's affair going back 3 months. More than enough to establish a pattern. Sean called while I was driving home. Your boy Bryce is a piece of work, he said. Drives that BMW like he owns the road, hits on anything in a skirt, and has a reputation for going after married women. Word is he thinks it's a game, seeing how many wives he can charm away from their husbands. Charming. Gets better. He's got a regular table at Murphy's pub downtown, holds court there most Friday nights, brags about his conquests to anyone who'll listen. Real class act. What about work? Marketing director, makes good money, thinks he's God's gift to corporate America. But here's the interesting part. He's got a gambling problem. Poker games, sports betting, casino trips to Connecticut. Word is he's in deep with some serious people. That was useful information. A man with debts was a man with vulnerabilities. Anything else? He's got a temper when things don't go his way. Got kicked out of his last gym for starting a fight with a trainer. There's a pattern of escalation when he's challenged. I filed that away for future reference. Thanks, Sean. I owe you. You don't owe me anything. But Rowan, be careful with this guy. Men like that don't like losing, especially when it's public. I promised to be careful and hung up. Then I drove home to wait for Reina. She was already there when I arrived, her car in the driveway, the front door standing open. I could hear her voice from the kitchen, sharp and angry. She was on the phone with someone, probably her lawyer or her mother or both. I don't care what he thinks he's proving, she was saying. This is ridiculous. We can work this out without involving lawyers and courts and all this drama. I walked into the kitchen and found her pacing by the window, still in her work clothes, but disheveled now, her perfect hair coming loose from its bun. The divorce papers were spread across the kitchen table, along with her disabled badge and the note I'd left. She looked up when she saw me, her face flushed with anger and something that might have been fear. I have to call you back, she said into the phone, then hung up and turned to face me. Really, Rowan? This is how you want to handle things? Sneaking around, playing games, humiliating me at work? I learned from the best, I said, taking off my jacket and hanging it on the back of a chair. How was your presentation? Don't. Her voice was sharp. Don't pretend this is normal. Don't act like everything's fine when you've just blown up our entire life. I didn't blow up anything. I just stopped pretending I didn't know what was happening. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to decide which approach to take. Anger wasn't working, so she'd probably try hurt and confusion next. I don't understand, she said, her voice softer now, more vulnerable. We can talk about this. If you're upset about something, if you think I've done something wrong, we can work it out. That's what married people do. Is it? I sat down at the table and picked up one of the divorce papers. Because I thought married people were honest with each other. I thought they didn't ask permission to kiss their lovers. The mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something cold and calculating in her eyes before the hurt expression returned. It was just a joke, Rowan. I told you that. If you're this insecure about my friendship with Bryce... Friendship? I nodded thoughtfully. Is that what you call it when you spend your lunch breaks at his condo? She went very still. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and showed her the location tracking data, the neat little map with timestamps showing her regular visits to Bryce's address. You gave me permission to track your phone, remember? When you lost it at that restaurant last year? You said it was a good safety measure, that married couples should always know where each other are. Reina stared at the screen, her face cycling through emotions, shock, anger, calculation, and finally a kind of cold resignation. You've been spying on me. I've been paying attention. There's a difference. She set the phone down carefully and looked at me with new eyes, as if she were seeing me clearly for the first time in months. How long have you known? Long enough. And you didn't say anything? You just let me keep... She trailed off, probably realizing that finishing that sentence wouldn't help her case. Keep lying to me? Keep cheating on me? Keep planning to humiliate me in public? I shrugged. I wanted to see how far you'd go. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. You're having an affair with Bryce Leston. You've been lying about it for months, and last night you asked my permission to kiss him in front of your coworkers so you could make it public without taking responsibility for it. She opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. We both knew there was no point in more lies. So what now? She asked finally. Now you find somewhere else to sleep tonight. Tomorrow we start dividing assets. Next week we're officially divorced. Rowan, please, we can fix this. I made a mistake, but it doesn't have to end everything. We have 7 years together, a whole life. That has to count for something. I looked at her standing there in our kitchen, pleading for a second chance she didn't deserve, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret. Just a cold, clear certainty that this was the right choice. It does count for something, I said. It counts as 7 years I'll never get back. She tried arguing for another hour, cycling through every emotional manipulation in the book. Tears, anger, promises, threats, appeals to our shared history and mutual friends. I listened to all of it with the same detached interest I'd give to a weather report. Finally, she gave up and went upstairs to pack a bag. I heard drawers slamming, closet doors banging, the sound of someone moving through a space they'd never expected to leave. When she came back down with a suitcase, she paused in the doorway. This isn't over, Rowan. I'm not just going to disappear and let you have everything your way. I wouldn't expect you to. I'll fight you on the house, the assets, everything. You think you're so smart, but I make more money than you. I have better lawyers than you. I can make this very expensive and very ugly. I nodded thoughtfully. You could try that. But before you do, you might want to ask yourself how your HR director position would survive a detailed investigation into your relationship with an employee. Maine might be a no-fault state for divorce, but companies tend to take a dim view of supervisors who sleep with their subordinates. Her face went white. You wouldn't. I wouldn't have to. These things have a way of coming out on their own, especially when people start asking questions during legal proceedings. She stared at me for a long moment, then picked up her suitcase and walked out. I heard her car start, heard her drive away, and then the house was quiet. I sat at the kitchen table for a while, looking at the divorce papers and thinking about what came next. This was just the beginning. Reina would regroup, probably with Bryce's help, and they'd try to find ways to hurt me or pressure me into a more favorable settlement. But that was fine. I'd been planning for this moment for weeks, and I had advantages they didn't know about yet. Information, allies, and most importantly, the moral high ground. Let them come. I was ready. 3 weeks later, I was standing in the middle of the annual Portland Harbor Festival, watching families enjoy funnel cake and live music while I waited for my carefully orchestrated trap to spring. The festival was one of those quintessentially Maine events: lobster rolls, local craft beer, and enough small-town charm to make tourists feel like they'd discovered the real America. I'd been planning this moment since the divorce papers were served. Reina had moved in with her friend Lila Hayes temporarily, while Bryce continued playing the innocent bystander, denying any romantic involvement to anyone who asked. They thought they were being clever, keeping their relationship quiet while the legal proceedings played out. They had no idea I'd been 3 steps ahead of them the entire time. Sean appeared at my elbow, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing his best innocent expression. "Target acquired," he said quietly. 3 o'clock, by the lobster roll stand. I turned casually and spotted them immediately. Reina, Bryce and Lila, standing together near one of the food vendors. They looked like any other group of friends enjoying the festival, except for the way Bryce kept touching Reina's lower back when he thought no one was looking. "Right on schedule," I murmured. The plan was simple, elegant, and completely legal. Over the past 3 weeks, I'd been seeding information throughout Reina's social circle, letting people know about the divorce while being carefully vague about the reasons. Just enough to get people curious, not enough to be accused of spreading malicious gossip. I'd also been documenting everything. Photos of Bryce's car in various parking lots where it shouldn't be, time-stamped location data, credit card receipts from restaurants where Reina claimed to be working late, a comprehensive timeline that painted a very clear picture for anyone who cared to look. But the real stroke of genius had been involving Mrs. Daly. "Oh, Rowan!" Her voice carried across the festival crowd with the precision of a woman who'd spent 70 years perfecting the art of strategic conversation. "There you are! I've been looking everywhere for you." Mrs. Daly approached with her usual purposeful stride, dressed in her Sunday best and carrying a large handbag that I knew contained several manila folders full of documentation. Behind her, looking slightly confused but game for whatever was happening, came Frankie Morrison from Murphy's Pub. "Mrs. Daly," I said warmly, giving her a hug. "You look lovely today. And Frankie, good to see you." "Rowan," Frankie nodded. He was a thin, weathered man in his 60s who'd been tending bar longer than I'd been alive. More importantly, he'd been listening to Bryce's drunken bragging sessions for months and had very strong opinions about men who cheated on their wives. "I was just telling Frankie about that conversation we had," Mrs. Daly said, her voice pitched to Carrie. "About what I've been seeing in the neighborhood. Such a shame when marriages fall apart. But sometimes these things are for the best." Several people nearby had started listening with the casual interest that small-town gossip always generated. I could see Reina's group beginning to notice the attention we were drawing. "Well," I said diplomatically, "these situations are always complicated." "Oh, but this one isn't complicated at all," Mrs. Daly continued. "When a woman starts bringing strange men home while her husband's at work, that's pretty straightforward, especially when the neighbors can see everything from their kitchen windows." The crowd was growing now, drawn by Mrs. Daly's authoritative tone and the promise of juicy gossip. I spotted several people I recognized from Reina's office, including Monica, the HR assistant who'd been feeding me information about Bryce's workplace behavior. "Now, Eleanor," Frankie said, playing his part perfectly, "maybe we shouldn't be talking about private matters in public." "Private?" Mrs. Daly looked scandalized. "There's nothing private about carrying on in broad daylight. Why, I have a whole diary full of dates and times, license plate numbers too. That silver BMW was hard to miss." I saw Reina go rigid across the crowd. She'd spotted us now, and she was clearly recognizing the license plate reference. Bryce was looking around nervously, probably wondering why everyone seemed to be staring in their direction. "BMW?" Monica spoke up from the edge of our growing audience. "Like the one Bryce Leston drives?" "Oh, you know him?" Mrs. Daly asked with innocent curiosity. "Handsome young man? Works at that big company downtown? Well, I suppose it makes sense that he'd have friends who know him. Small world." The pieces were clicking together for everyone within earshot. Reina's divorce, the mysterious affair, Bryce's car, Mrs. Daly's detailed observations. It was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. "Wait," said someone I didn't recognize. "Isn't that Bryce over there, with Rowan Kerrick?" All eyes turned toward the lobster roll stand, where Reina, Bryce, and Lila were now clearly aware they'd become the center of attention. Bryce had gone pale, while Lila was frantically whispering something in Reina's ear. "Oh my," Mrs. Daly said, following everyone's gaze. "How awkward. Should we go say hello?" Before anyone could answer, she was already moving through the crowd with the determination of a woman on a mission. The rest of us followed, drawn along by curiosity and the irresistible pull of unfolding drama. "Reina, dear," Mrs. Daly called out as we approached. "What a lovely surprise, and you must be Bryce. I feel like I know you already." Bryce managed a weak smile. "I'm sorry. Have we met?" "Not formally, but I've seen so much of you lately. You have such a distinctive car. Silver BMW, isn't it? With those lovely chrome wheels?" The color drained from Bryce's face. Around us, the crowd was growing, as more people realized something interesting was happening. I could see phones coming out, people preparing to document whatever came next. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," Reina said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Mrs. Daly, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "Oh, there's no misunderstanding, dear. I keep very careful records. Would you like to see them?" Mrs. Daly opened her handbag and pulled out a small notebook. "Let's see. March 15th, BMW arrived at 12:30 p.m., departed at 3:45 p.m. March 22nd, arrived 11:15 a.m., departed 2:20 p.m. Should I continue?" Bryce stepped forward, his face flushed with anger now instead of embarrassment. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but—" "Game?" Mrs. Daly drew herself up to her full height, which wasn't much, but her indignation was formidable. "Young man, I've been keeping track of my neighborhood for 40 years. When strange cars start showing up at married women's houses while their husbands are at work, that's not a game, that's adultery." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Several people gasped, and I heard someone whisper, "Oh my God, it's true." Reina looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. Lila was tugging at her arm, clearly trying to get her to leave, but they were surrounded now by a crowd of curious onlookers, many of whom knew them from work or social functions. "This is ridiculous," Bryce said, his voice rising. "We're friends. There's nothing wrong with friends spending time together." "Friends?" Frankie spoke up from behind me. "Is that what you call it? Because I've heard you talking about your conquest at my bar, bragging about how you were going to steal another man's wife." Bryce spun around, his face twisted with rage. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? You've been holding court at Murphy's pub every Friday night for months, telling anyone who'd listen about your latest married woman. Real proud of yourself, weren't you?" The crowd was buzzing now, people sharing looks and whispered comments. I could see the story spreading in real time as people texted friends and posted on social media. By tomorrow, everyone in Portland would know about Reina and Bryce's affair. "That's enough," Reina said, her voice cracking. "This is humiliating and inappropriate. Rowan, how could you orchestrate something like this?" I looked at her with genuine surprise. "Orchestrate? Reina, I'm just here enjoying the festival. I can't control what people choose to discuss in public. You planned this. You and your vindictive old neighbor and this bartender. This is harassment." "Actually," Monica spoke up, "this is just people telling the truth. And honestly, Reina, after what you and Bryce have been doing at the office, I think everyone deserves to know what kind of people they're working with." "What we've been doing at the office?" Bryce demanded. "We haven't done anything inappropriate at work." Monica laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the crowd noise. "Really? The conference room bookings during lunch hours? The overnight business trips that weren't on anyone else's calendar? The way you've been marking your territory like some kind of alpha male?" I had to admire Monica's performance. She'd been feeding me information for weeks, documenting Bryce and Reina's workplace indiscretions with the thoroughness of someone who genuinely enjoyed watching hypocrites get exposed. "You're all insane," Bryce said. But his voice lacked conviction now. He was starting to realize how badly this was going, how completely his carefully maintained image was crumbling in front of half the town. "Are we?" Mrs. Daly asked sweetly. "Or are we just tired of watching good people get hurt by selfish behavior? Rowan is a fine man, and he deserved better than what you two put him through." The crowd murmured agreement, and I could see the tide of public opinion turning decisively against Reina and Bryce. In a small city like Portland, reputation mattered. Once you were labeled as the kind of people who cheated and lied, that followed you everywhere. Lila finally managed to pull Reina away from the crowd, with Bryce trailing behind them like a whipped dog. As they retreated, I heard someone call out, "Guess the work husband joke isn't so funny now?" The crowd began to disperse, people drifting back to their festival activities, but still buzzing with excitement over the drama they'd witnessed. Mrs. Daly, Frankie, and Monica gathered around me, all wearing expressions of deep satisfaction. "Well," Mrs. Daly said, tucking her notebook back into her handbag, "I think that went rather well." "Better than well," Monica agreed. "By Monday morning, everyone at Pinnacle Industries will know exactly what kind of people they've been working with." Frankie clapped me on the shoulder. "That boy Bryce won't be showing his face at my pub anytime soon. Word gets around fast in the service industry." I thanked them all for their help and watched them head back to their families and friends. Then Sean appeared beside me, grinning broadly. "That was beautiful, man. Absolutely beautiful. You didn't have to say a word, just let them hang themselves with their own rope." "The truth has a way of coming out," I said. "I just helped it along a little." My phone was already buzzing with texts and calls from people who'd heard about the festival confrontation. Some were offering support, others were asking for details, and a few were warning me that Reina and Bryce wouldn't take this humiliation lying down. I wasn't worried. This was exactly what I'd been hoping for, a public reckoning that would make it impossible for them to continue denying their affair or painting me as the villain in our divorce. Now everyone knew the truth, and the court of public opinion had rendered its verdict. But as Sean and I walked through the festival crowd, enjoying the music and the smell of fried food, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Reina and Bryce had been publicly humiliated, their reputations damaged, their relationship exposed for what it really was. People like that didn't just accept defeat gracefully, they fought back, and they fought dirty. I was counting on it. Monday morning brought the reckoning I'd been expecting. I was in my workshop, putting the finishing touches on a custom bookshelf, when Monica called with an update from Pinnacle Industries. "You should see this place," she said, barely containing her excitement. "It's like a bomb went off. Everyone's talking about what happened at the festival, and Reina looks like she hasn't slept in 3 days. What about Bryce? He's trying to act like nothing happened, but nobody's buying it. 3 different people have already asked me if the rumors about them using the conference room are true. I may have confirmed a few details." I smiled, running my hand along the smooth cherry wood surface. "And management?" "That's where it gets interesting. Apparently, Reina's boss got several calls over the weekend from employees who were at the festival. There's going to be a meeting this afternoon to discuss workplace conduct and professional standards." This was better than I'd hoped. I'd expected the public humiliation to damage their reputations, but I hadn't anticipated it sparking an official investigation at their workplace. "Monica, I owe you dinner at the nicest restaurant in Portland. Just seeing those 2 get what they deserve is payment enough, but I'll take the dinner anyway." After she hung up, I called Tom Ingram to update him on the situation. "Interesting development," he said after I'd filled him in. "If they're both facing workplace discipline, it could significantly impact the divorce settlement. Reina's income potential, her ability to claim spousal support, the narrative around fault, all of that changes if she loses her job." "What are the chances of that happening?" "Hard to say, but HR directors who engage in inappropriate relationships with subordinates don't usually survive the scandal, especially when it becomes public knowledge. Companies are very sensitive about liability issues these days." I spent the rest of the morning working and fielding calls from friends and neighbors who'd heard about the festival confrontation. The story was spreading through Portland's social networks with the speed and enthusiasm that only truly juicy gossip could generate. Around noon, Sean showed up with sandwiches and news. "Drove past Pinnacle Industries on my way over," he said, unwrapping a turkey club. "Saw Bryce in the parking lot, and he looked like a man walking to his own execution. Guilt will do that to you. Or fear. Word is getting around about his gambling debts, too. Apparently, some of his creditors aren't the patient type, and having his income threatened isn't helping his stress levels. That was an interesting development. A man under financial pressure was more likely to make desperate decisions, and desperate people were predictable in their unpredictability. How much does he owe? Enough that losing his job would be catastrophic. 6 figures from what I hear. The kind of money that makes people do stupid things. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the city through the open workshop windows. Then my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Rowan Kerrick," I answered. "You bastard." Reina's voice was tight with rage and exhaustion. "You destroyed everything. Are you happy now?" "I'm content," I said honestly. "How was your meeting?" "Don't pretend you don't know. Your little spy network has probably already given you a full report." She wasn't wrong, but I didn't see any reason to confirm it. "I've been working all day. What meeting?" "HR called us in for questioning. 3 hours of interrogation about our relationship, our use of company resources, our professional conduct. They're launching a full investigation." That sounds thorough. "They're going to fire us, Rowan, both of us, because of your vindictive little performance at the festival." I considered that. Actually, they're going to fire you because you violated company policy by having an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. The festival just made it impossible for them to ignore what was happening. We never did anything wrong at work. Monica has conference room booking records that say otherwise, plus expense reports, travel documentation, and testimony from multiple witnesses about your behavior. There was a long pause. When Reina spoke again, her voice was different, smaller, more vulnerable. "What do you want, Rowan? What will it take for you to call off your dogs and let us move on with our lives?" "I want exactly what I asked for in the divorce papers. Fair division of assets, no spousal support, and for you to take responsibility for your choices." "And if I agree to that?" "Then the divorce goes through quickly and quietly, and you can start rebuilding your life somewhere else." "Somewhere else? Come on, Reina. You can't seriously think you can stay in Portland after this. Everyone knows what you did. Every job interview, every social function, every time you walk into a restaurant or grocery store, people are going to remember." Another long pause. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her working through the implications. "You planned this," she said finally. "All of it. The timing, the location, the people who were there. You orchestrated my complete destruction. I created an opportunity for the truth to come out. You and Bryce did the rest yourselves. I hate you. I know." She hung up, and I set the phone aside. Sean was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "That was cold, man, even for you. She made her choices. I'm just making sure she lives with the consequences. And Bryce, what's his part in your master plan?" I smiled, thinking about the information Sean had gathered about Bryce's gambling debts and his reputation for escalating conflicts when he felt cornered. Bryce is going to do exactly what men like him always do when they're backed into a corner. He's going to lash out, make threats, probably try to intimidate me into backing down. And when he does, I'll be ready for him. That evening, I was proven right. I was at home, reviewing some contract proposals, when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the front window, I could see Bryce's silver BMW parked at an aggressive angle, taking up most of the space. I opened the front door before he could knock. "Bryce, what can I do for you?" He looked terrible, disheveled, unshaven, with the kind of manic energy that came from too much stress and not enough sleep. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into the house. I closed the door and followed him into the living room, where he was pacing like a caged animal. "Nice place," he said, looking around at the custom built-ins and hardwood floors. "Must be worth a lot of money. Be a shame if something happened to it." "Is that a threat?" It's a reality check. You think you're so smart, pulling your little strings, manipulating people like puppets. But you have no idea what you're messing with. I sat down in my favorite chair and studied him. Up close, I could see the telltale signs of a man coming apart at the seams, the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted around the room, the barely controlled desperation in his voice. Enlighten me. I owe money to people who don't accept excuses. Serious money to serious people. Losing my job isn't just an inconvenience, it's a potential health hazard. That sounds like a personal problem. He stopped pacing and stared at me. You really think this is over, don't you? You think you've won, that you can just walk away and live happily ever after while Reina and I pay the price for your revenge fantasy. I think you're both adults who made adult choices and are now dealing with adult consequences. Adult consequences. He laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. You want to see adult consequences? I can show you adult consequences. Bryce pulled out his phone and started scrolling through photos. Then he turned the screen toward me, showing a picture of my workshop taken from outside. Nice security system you've got there. Oh wait, you don't have one. Just a standard lock on a wooden door. Wouldn't take much to get inside, would it? I looked at the photo, then back at his face. Are you threatening to vandalize my business? I'm explaining reality to you. You cost me my job, my reputation, my relationship with Reina. You think I'm just going to accept that and slink away? I think you're going to do whatever you think will make you feel better in the short term without considering the long-term consequences. It's what you've been doing all along. His face flushed red. You smug piece of... Careful, I said quietly. You're already facing potential criminal charges for harassment. Threatening me in my own home probably isn't the best strategy. Criminal charges? For what? I pulled out my own phone and showed him the recording app that had been running since he'd walked through my door. For making threats against my property and personal safety. Maine is a one-party consent state for recordings, so this conversation is perfectly legal evidence. The color drained from his face. You're recording me? I'm protecting myself. You came to my home uninvited, pushed your way inside, and started making threats. Any reasonable person would want documentation of that behavior. Bryce stared at the phone, then at me, his face cycling through emotions. Rage, fear, calculation, and finally a kind of defeated exhaustion. You really have thought of everything, haven't you? I've tried to be thorough. He sat down heavily on my couch, putting his head in his hands. For a moment he looked less like a threatening presence and more like what he really was, a man who'd made terrible choices and was finally facing the consequences. What happens now? He asked, without looking up. Now you leave my house, stay away from my property, and figure out how to rebuild your life without involving me or trying to blame me for your problems. And if I don't? Then this recording goes to the police, along with any other evidence of harassment or threats. You'll have bigger problems than gambling debts and unemployment. He stood up slowly, smoothing down his wrinkled suit jacket in a gesture that seemed more reflexive than purposeful. This isn't over, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice anymore. Yes, it is. You just haven't accepted it yet. After he left, I sat in my living room for a long time, thinking about the conversation and what it meant. Bryce was clearly at the end of his rope, which made him dangerous in some ways, but also predictable. Men like him always followed the same pattern when they were cornered: threats, escalation, and finally collapse when they realized their tactics weren't working. The recording was safely stored in multiple locations, and I'd already sent a copy to Tom Ingram with a note explaining the context. If Bryce tried anything stupid, we'd be ready for him. But somehow I didn't think it would come to that. He was already beaten, even if he didn't know it yet. The job loss, the public humiliation, the financial pressure, it was all adding up to a man who would soon have no choice but to disappear and start over somewhere else. Just like Reina. My phone buzzed with a text from Monica. Both of them cleaned out their offices tonight. Security escorted them out. Thought you'd want to know. I smiled and typed back, "Thanks for everything." 2 down, and the game was almost over. 2 weeks after Bryce's pathetic attempt at intimidation, I was putting the finishing touches on what I'd come to think of as my masterpiece. Not the cherrywood dining table I'd been commissioned to build, though that was turning out beautifully, but the elaborate trap I'd been constructing around Reina and Bryce's crumbling relationship. The unemployment had hit them both hard, but in different ways. Bryce had become increasingly desperate, making increasingly poor decisions as his gambling debts mounted and his creditors grew impatient. Reina, meanwhile, had retreated into denial, convinced that she could somehow salvage her reputation and find another job in Portland's tight-knit business community. They were both wrong, and I was about to prove it. "You look like a man with a plan," Sean said, joining me at Murphy's pub where I'd been nursing a beer and watching the local news. "A particularly devious plan from the expression on your face." "The best kind," I agreed. "Want to help me spring the final trap?" Sean grinned. "Do I ever?" I'd chosen Murphy's pub for this conversation because it was Bryce's old stomping ground, the place where he'd bragged about his conquests and made enemies of half the regular customers. Frankie had been more than happy to help with my plan, partly out of loyalty to me, but mostly because he genuinely despised men who cheated on their wives. "Here's what's going to happen," I explained, pulling out my phone to show Sean a series of text messages. "Tomorrow night, Reina and Bryce are going to receive invitations to meet me at the Riverside Motel on Congress Street. Separate invitations, different times, both claiming I want to discuss a private settlement. And they'll both show up? Reina will show up because she's desperate to avoid a public divorce trial that will air all her dirty laundry. Bryce will show up because he thinks he can intimidate me into giving him money to help with his debt problems." Sean studied the messages. "What makes you think they won't compare notes first?" "Because they're not really together anymore. Oh, they're still seeing each other, but the stress has fractured their relationship. Reina blames Bryce for not being discreet enough. Bryce blames Reina for not protecting him when the investigation started. They're staying together out of stubbornness and shared misery, not love. And you know this how?" I smiled and nodded toward the bar, where Frankie was polishing glasses and pretending not to listen to our conversation. "Because Bryce came in here 3 nights ago, completely wasted, and spent 2 hours complaining about how Reina was ruining his life. Frankie recorded the whole thing on his phone." "Of course he did. What else?" "Monica's been tracking their job search efforts through mutual contacts. Neither of them has gotten so much as an interview. Word has spread through the business community about what happened, and no one wants to hire people with their reputation." Sean whistled low. "So they're broke, unemployed, and turning on each other. And tomorrow night you're going to what exactly?" "Tomorrow night I'm going to give them one last chance to destroy themselves completely." The Riverside Motel was exactly the kind of place I needed for this operation. Cheap, sleazy, and equipped with security cameras that the management was happy to let me access for a small fee. It was also the kind of place that would humiliate Reina just by being there, which was an added bonus. I arrived an hour early and set up in the room I'd rented, positioning my own recording equipment to supplement the motel's security system. Then I waited. Reina arrived first, at exactly 7 o'clock. I watched through the window as she parked her car and sat there for several minutes, clearly steeling herself for whatever she thought was about to happen. When she finally got out, she looked around nervously before walking to the room. Her knock was soft, hesitant. "Come in," I called. "It's open." She entered slowly, taking in the shabby room with obvious distaste. "Really, Rowan? This is where you wanted to meet?" "I thought it was appropriate," I said, gesturing to the single chair I'd placed in the center of the room. "Private, discreet, the kind of place where people go when they want to keep secrets." She remained standing, clutching her purse like a shield. "You said you wanted to discuss a settlement." "I do. Have a seat." "I'll stand, thank you." Suit yourself. I've been thinking about our situation, and I've come to the conclusion that maybe we've both been too stubborn. Maybe there's a way to work this out that doesn't involve lawyers and judges and public hearings. Hope flickered in her eyes. What kind of way? The kind where you admit what you did, apologize sincerely, and agree to a settlement that reflects the reality of your situation. The hope died. My situation? Unemployed, unemployable in this city, and facing a divorce trial that will make the festival incident look like a minor embarrassment. You're the one who made me unemployable. You and your vindictive little campaign of character assassination. I'm the one who exposed the truth. There's a difference. She started pacing, her heels clicking on the cheap linoleum. What do you want, Rowan? Specifically, what will it take for you to stop this campaign and let me rebuild my life? I want you to admit that you had an affair with Bryce Leston. I want you to admit that you lied about it repeatedly. And I want you to agree to the original settlement terms without any further negotiation. And if I do that, then the divorce goes through quietly, and I don't pursue any further legal action regarding your misuse of marital assets or your workplace misconduct. She stopped pacing and stared at me. Legal action? What legal action? I pulled out a folder and handed her a document. Detailed accounting of joint credit card charges for restaurants, hotels, and gifts that were clearly related to your affair. Under Maine law, I can pursue reimbursement for marital assets used to support an extramarital relationship. Her face went white as she scanned the document. This is thousands of dollars. $12,437, to be exact, plus interest and legal fees. I can't pay this. I don't have a job, remember? Then you'd better hope you can find one quickly, or convince someone else to help you pay it. She looked up from the document, her eyes bright with tears and rage. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching me suffer, making me beg, destroying everything I've worked for. I'm not making you do anything. I'm just presenting you with choices and letting you decide how to respond. Choices? What choices? You've systematically destroyed my reputation, my career, my relationship. Your relationship? I interrupted. You mean with Bryce? The man who's been complaining to anyone who'll listen about how you've ruined his life? She went very still. What are you talking about? You didn't know. He's been making the rounds of every bar in Portland, telling anyone who'll buy him a drink that this whole mess is your fault, that he was just having fun, and you're the one who got obsessed and possessive. That's not true. Isn't it? When's the last time you two had a conversation that didn't turn into a fight about whose fault this is? She didn't answer, but I could see the truth in her face. Their relationship was already over. They just hadn't admitted it yet. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to sign those settlement papers, and then you're going to leave Portland. Start fresh somewhere else, where people don't know your story. And if I refuse? Then we go to trial, where all of this becomes public record. Every detail of your affair, every lie you told, every dollar you spent on your boyfriend with our joint credit cards. Plus, I pursue full reimbursement for misused marital assets, which means you'll be starting your new life with a significant debt hanging over your head. She stared at the settlement papers for a long time, and I could see her working through the mathematics of her situation. No job, no prospects in Portland, a boyfriend who was already blaming her for his problems, and now the threat of additional legal action. You've really thought of everything, haven't you? I've tried to be thorough. She was reaching for a pen when we heard a car door slam outside. Then footsteps and a sharp knock on the door. Expecting someone? Reina asked. Actually, yes. I walked to the door and opened it to reveal Bryce, looking even worse than he had during his visit to my house. Bryce, right on time. He pushed past me into the room, then stopped short when he saw Reina. What is she doing here? Same thing you are, discussing a settlement. Bryce looked back and forth between us, his face cycling through confusion, suspicion, and finally understanding. You set us up. I invited you both to discuss your futures. What happens next is up to you. Reina was staring at Bryce with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, cold hatred. You've been talking about me in bars, she said, telling people this is all my fault. I never said that. Rowan says you did, and somehow I believe him more than I believe you. Bryce shot me a venomous look. You're really enjoying this, aren't you? Playing us against each other, watching us tear each other apart. I'm not playing anyone against anyone. I'm just letting you both see each other clearly for the first time. This is manipulation, Reina said, but her voice lacked conviction. This is reality, I corrected. You two destroyed my marriage for the sake of a cheap thrill, and now you're destroying each other because neither of you wants to take responsibility for the consequences. Bryce stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. You think you're so much better than us, don't you? So moral, so righteous. But look what you've become, a vindictive, manipulative... Careful, I warned. We're being recorded, and you're already facing potential harassment charges. He stopped, his face flushed with rage and frustration. Recorded? I gestured to the security camera in the corner of the room, its red light blinking steadily. The Riverside Motel takes security very seriously. Plus, I have my own equipment running. Everything that's said in this room tonight will be preserved for posterity. Reina looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. You planned this. All of it. The location, the timing, getting us both here together. I created an opportunity for honesty. What you do with it is your choice. Honesty? Bryce laughed bitterly. You want honesty? Fine. Yes, I've been complaining about Reina in bars. Yes, I think she's partly to blame for how this whole thing exploded. And yes, I wish I'd never gotten involved with a married woman in the first place. Reina recoiled as if he'd slapped her. Partly to blame? I'm partly to blame? You're the one who pursued me. You're the one who said your feelings were real, that this wasn't just about the thrill of the chase. Maybe I lied. Maybe I tell all the married women that. Did you ever consider that possibility? The words hung in the air like a physical presence. I could see Reina processing them, understanding finally hitting her with the force of a freight train. You bastard, she whispered. Yeah, well, you're not exactly innocent either. You threw away 7 years of marriage for what? A few months of excitement? Some attention from a younger man? Was it worth it? She didn't answer, but tears were streaming down her face now. Not tears of sadness, I realized, but tears of pure rage. Get out, she said quietly. What? Get out, she screamed, her voice echoing off the cheap walls. Get out of this room! Get out of my life! Get out of my sight before I do something we'll both regret! Bryce backed toward the door, his earlier bravado completely gone. Reina, let's just calm down and... Calm down? She grabbed a cheap ceramic ashtray from the nightstand and hurled it at his head. He ducked, and it shattered against the doorframe. You destroyed my marriage, my career, my entire life for a game, for a conquest. Calm down. You destroyed your own marriage, he shot back, his own anger flaring. I didn't make you any promises. I didn't force you to cheat on your husband. You made that choice all by yourself. Because I thought you cared about me. I did care about you, but not enough to sacrifice my own life for your mistakes. She stared at him for a long moment, and I could see something fundamental shift in her expression. The last vestiges of whatever feelings she'd had for him simply evaporated, leaving behind only contempt. We're done, she said quietly. Whatever this was, whatever we had, it's over. Don't call me, don't text me, don't come near me ever again. Fine by me. You're damaged goods anyway. No one's going to want you after this. That was a mistake. Reina's face went completely blank, and I recognized the expression from our own worst fights, the calm before the storm. Get out, she said again, her voice quiet. Get out now, or I swear I will make what Rowan did to us look like a love letter. Bryce must have recognized the danger, because he backed out of the room without another word. We heard his car start and drive away, leaving Reina and me alone in the shabby motel room. She stood there for several minutes, breathing hard, staring at the door where Bryce had been. Then she turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, but something like respect. That was masterful, she said. Getting us both here, letting us destroy each other while you watched. I have to admit, I underestimated you. I just wanted you both to see the truth. The truth? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. The truth is that I threw away the best thing in my life for a man who saw me as a trophy. The truth is that I'm 32 years old, unemployed, unemployable, and completely alone. You could start over somewhere else. Could I? With what money? What references? What future? She picked up the settlement papers from where she'd dropped them. But you're right about one thing. Fighting you in court would just make everything worse. She signed the papers with quick, decisive strokes, then handed them back to me. There, you win. Complete victory, total destruction of your enemies. Are you satisfied? I looked at her standing there in that cheap motel room, her perfect corporate facade finally stripped away to reveal the broken, desperate woman underneath. A year ago, I would have felt sorry for her. 6 months ago, I would have felt guilty about my role in her destruction. Now I felt nothing but a cold sense of completion. I'm satisfied, I said. She nodded and picked up her purse. I'll be out of town by the end of the week. You'll never have to see me again. Reina? I called as she reached the door. She turned back, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the woman I'd once loved. For what it's worth, I said. I'm sorry it came to this. She studied my face for a long moment, then shook her head. No, you're not. And honestly, I don't blame you. Then she was gone, and I was alone in the motel room with my recording equipment and my complete victory. I packed up my gear and drove home through the quiet Portland streets, past the harbor where fishing boats bobbed at anchor, past the festival grounds where this had all begun, past the life I'd built and defended and ultimately preserved. At home, I sat in my workshop surrounded by the furniture I'd made with my own hands, the tools I'd collected over years of careful work, the business I'd built from nothing. Everything was exactly as it should be, exactly as I'd planned. My phone buzzed with a text from Sean. How did it go? I typed back, it's over. And it was. Reina would leave town, probably tonight. Bryce would follow soon after, driven out by his creditors and his reputation. The divorce would be finalized within weeks, and I would be free to rebuild my life exactly as I wanted it. I'd won completely, decisively, without mercy or compromise. So why did victory taste so much like ash? I pushed the thought away and went back to work on my dining table, losing myself in the familiar rhythm of sanding and shaping, creating something beautiful from raw materials. Outside, Portland slept peacefully, unaware that one of its most entertaining scandals had finally reached its conclusion. The game was over, and I had won. That was all that mattered.